Before I get into today's episode, let me tell you about Indie Drop-In Network's True Crime podcast. If you found yourself being a little extra excited about my episodes on Herbert Galembo and the Hatbox Baby, then maybe you need to feed your inner true crime nerd. Even though I occasionally will cover crimes from the obscure past, I can't always give you the true crime content you need. Luckily, there are thousands of other independent podcasters out there who can. Follow the link in my show notes, and each week Greg will feature a new, high-quality true crime podcast. You do not want to miss out on these shows. Art is one of the most uniquely human experiences, whether you're making it or just simply enjoying it. Which is why I suppose it's so valuable. In many ways, art is the invisible thread that tethers our bodies to our humanity. It's such an important part of being human that Viktor Pinchuk once said, "Art, freedom, and creativity will change society faster than politics." But what happens when something so valuable simply vanishes? My name is Josh, and this is Obscure History. The year is 1633. A young, up-and-coming artist going by the name of Rembrandt has set up his easel and begun the treacherous work of bringing the past to life. Oil on canvas. His inspiration? A passage from the New Testament. His brushstrokes slowly illuminate a fishing ship on a dangerous sea. He brings to life the water, the terror, and somehow he seems to have even captured the angry wind in his paint. The scene depicts the frailty of our human condition, the overwhelming power of nature, and the serenity of Christ as depicted in the books Matthew, Mark, and Luke. The colors are impeccable. The dark sea looks as if it could reach through the canvas and pull the observer in. The single ray of light from above highlights every minute detail. Even the vomit pouring out of the mouth of one of Christ's disciples as they retch over the railing of the ship. Finally, the young artist puts himself in the scene, staring directly back at the observer, eyes fixated on the audience, inviting them to also put themselves in the scene, to don their rain gear and join him with Christ in that stormy night. When all is said and done, and the brushes have been cleaned, the young artist looks over his painting with satisfaction. He named it Christ in the Storm on the Sea of Galilee. Maybe he knew at the time, maybe he didn't, but that painting would become one of his masterpieces, a fundamental piece of a legacy of excellence. The young artist would sell the painting, and it would be sold again and again until it finally found its home in the hands of Isabella Stewart Gardner. Isabella Stewart was born in New York City on April 14, 1840. Her father, David Stewart, was a wealthy and successful linen merchant. As a girl, she enjoyed the benefits of coming from an enormously wealthy family. She grew up in Manhattan, and from age 5 to 15 she attended a girls' school where she studied art, music, and dance, as well as French and Italian. It was here that her lifelong passion for art was first kindled. At age 16, the Stewarts moved to Paris, where Isabella was enrolled in a school for American children studying abroad. While in Europe, she was taken to the Museo Poldi Pizzoli in Milan. The experience was so inspiring that she vowed to her friends and family that if she were ever to inherit enough money to do so, she would start her own art museum. At age 18, Isabella returned to the United States and reunited with one of her classmates, Julia Gardner. Much like the Stewarts, the Gardners were one of New England's wealthiest families, and Julia's brother Jack happened to be one of the most eligible bachelors in Boston. Naturally, Isabella and Jack felt pulled to each other almost immediately. They began their relationship quickly and were married only 2 years later. To celebrate their union, Isabella's father gifted them a house in Boston where they would live out the rest of their days. The young couple sought to share their love with a child, and were successful in that mission, but their joy was short-lived. Isabella gave birth to a son in 1863, but by 1865 their home was once again empty, as the boy had been taken from them by pneumonia. The young couple tried again, but after a tragic miscarriage they decided to give up and move on from that dream. In the following months, Isabella became extremely depressed and withdrew from society. On the advice of their family doctor, the couple set off to explore Europe and clear their heads. While they had intended to spend most of their time in Scandinavia, they found themselves in Paris, reigniting Isabella's passion for the arts. When they returned to the States, Isabella dedicated herself to being an outgoing socialite. Her extravagant taste, deep pockets, and general bending of societal norms made her a favorite target of the Boston papers. In fact, they had many pet names for her, including Belle, Donna Isabella, Isabella of Boston, and Mrs. Jack. She famously caused panic among the stuffy upper class by wearing a Boston Red Sox headband to a formal concert put on by the Boston Symphony Orchestra. The Gardners continued to spend their wealth on travel until Isabella inherited over $1 million from her father in 1891, which would be around $30 million in today's currency. With her freshly lined pockets and unimaginably deep well of financial resources to keep her secure, Isabella began seriously collecting art. One of her first acquisitions was the Concert by Vermeer, purchased at a Paris auction house in 1892. And after that, the floodgates were open. With the help of her connoisseur Bernard Berenson, Isabella's collection rapidly went from passion project to serious world-class assortment. In fact, Isabella's collection became so immense that even after building onto their house, it could not contain all of the art she had purchased. The couple talked about establishing a museum to house all of their art, but before they could embark on that project together, Jack died tragically and suddenly in 1898. Beaten back by the loss of her love, Isabella would resolve to complete the project on her own. She purchased land for the museum in the marshy Fenway area of Boston and hired architect Willard T. Sears to build a museum modeled on the Renaissance palaces of Venice. Gardner was deeply involved in every aspect of the design, though, leading Sears to say that he was merely the structural engineer making Gardner's design possible. The museum opened privately on January 1st, 1903, with a grand opening celebration featuring a performance by members of the Boston Symphony Orchestra and a menu that included champagne and donuts. It was open for public viewing a few months after the private opening, and ever since it has boasted an eclectic variety of artworks ranging from textiles, architectural elements, paintings, and sculptures. Isabella Stewart Gardner dedicated herself to that museum until her death in 1927. And even after death, she was still dedicated to supporting the arts and her fellow man. Her will created an endowment of $1 million and outlined stipulations for support of the museum, including that the permanent collection not be significantly altered. In keeping with her philanthropic nature, she also left sizable bequests to the Massachusetts Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, the Industrial School for the Crippled and Deformed, Animal Rescue Leagues of Boston, and the Massachusetts Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. In her life, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum was a sanctuary, a chapel, a place where the invisible strand of humanity was displayed proudly upon the walls. It was hallowed ground for any artist or art enthusiast, and it would remain that way for years, decades even, until 1990, when that sacred space was defiled. But before we get to that, we need to pay the bills, so hang out for about 90 seconds, and when we return, we'll explore the salacious fate of the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. It was 1990, and Rembrandt's Christ in the Storm on the Sea of Galilee had sat on display on some of the most highly esteemed walls in the world for over 3 centuries. The eyes of Rembrandt himself staring from the deck of that boat, past the violent waves and into the world beyond the canvas. For more than 3 decades, he watched the world turn. He watched as men covered him with cloth and moved him to another location, only to uncover and hang him in a new place of high regard. And he watched it again and again. That small self-portrait of Rembrandt must have seen love and hate and death and conspiracy. He must have witnessed the world continue spinning through seismic social and political change. And in 1990, he was watching it change again. The Cold War was finally over and the economy was in bloom because of it. Brand new industries were emerging as computers were beginning to fill every room of every building. The trendsetters and culture shapers were embracing new and underappreciated cultures. Where decades prior yearned for homogeneous media, songs that sounded the same created by people that looked the same, the 1990s began valuing alternative music, art, literature, fashion, and design. For the first time, the world was being taken over by the unwashed masses, those who were unrefined, those who valued street graffiti as much as the penultimate works of the Renaissance masters. If you could have asked that tiny representation of Rembrandt what the world looked like from his secure place on the wall of the Isabella Gardner Stewart Museum, he might have suggested that it was the end of fine art as the world knew it. And those feelings may have been justified. But just because popular culture was being successfully invaded by the newest counterculture, Christ in the Storm on the Sea of Galilee was still valuable. Wildly so. And as it goes with all things of immense value, it attracted the lusting eyes of those who could not resist a quick buck. In the early morning hours of March 18, 1990, museum security guards, 23-year-old Rick Abbott and 25-year-old Randy Heston were surprised when a team of thieves dressed as police officers entered their building. The thieves' disguises and insistence that they needed to discuss the actions of a rowdy St. Patrick's Day crowd were effective enough that the young security guards buzzed them right through the door. The ensuing scuffle resulted in the security guards being fully immobilized and restrained by duct tape. While the security guards struggled against their restraints, one of the phony police officers announced, "Gentlemen, this is a robbery." They then frantically darted through the museum, crudely cutting as many paintings from their frames as possible. The robbery in total lasted 81 minutes. The robbers made multiple trips out of the museum to their getaway car. They moved quickly, and they slipped away into the night carrying with them $500 million worth of fine art. When Abbott and Heston were discovered by the morning shift workers, an investigation was launched immediately. And the investigators were puzzled immediately. The thieves didn't touch some of the museum's most valuable pieces, despite disabling the cameras and spending nearly an hour and a half in the museum. They certainly had the ability to take the most valuable pieces if they had wanted to, but instead they took a strange assortment of artworks. Some from Rembrandt, some from Vermeer, some Chinese pottery, among others. Years of diligent work would eventually turn up clues. Some large, some small, most insignificant. But the artworks stolen that night have never been seen again. Were they sold in secret on the black market to some collector on a budget? Were they simply trashed when the actual value was announced by the FBI? Who knows? But the legacy of the theft lives on. The museum is offering a $10 million reward for the return of the artworks. And the young man who let the phony police into the museum that night still lives with the guilt. In 2015, Abbott told NPR, "At the time of the robbery, I had just dropped out of Berklee College of Music. I was playing in a band and working night shift at the museum. I was just this hippie guy who wasn't hurting anything, wasn't on anybody's radar, and the next day I was on everybody's radar for the largest art heist in history. You know, most of the guards were either older or were college students. Nobody there was capable of dealing with actual criminals. But that night, 2 cops rang the doorbell. They had hats, badges, they looked like cops, and I let them in. They said, 'Are you here alone?' And I said, 'I have a partner that's out on a round.' They said, 'Call him down.' And they said, 'Gentlemen, this is a robbery.' And they handcuffed me to the electrical box for 7 hours. At first I was panicking, then I started to sing 'I Shall Be Released' by Bob Dylan. I don't know how long I was singing that damn song for, but it was quite some time." He continues by saying, "Even if they get the paintings back, they'll never be the same, and I feel horrible about that. I don't want to be remembered for this alone. I'd like to be remembered for the good things I've done. I'm a husband, a father of 2 really cool kids. But they're saying it's $500 million worth of artwork. And ultimately, I'm the one that made the decision to buzz them in. It's the kind of thing that most people don't have to learn to cope with. It's like doing penance. It's always there." What he failed to mention in his NPR interview was that the security camera footage captured him on March 17th, the day before the heist, opening the same side doors the robbers had used, and holding a clandestine meeting with a figure in a waist-length coat with a tall collar. Now, it's important to note that nobody has been convicted for the theft, Abbott included. Actually, despite his odd meeting the day before the robbery, he was officially cleared of involvement around the time of his NPR interview. While the authorities haven't made a conviction or found the artwork, theories abound. Everyone from amateur musicians to the Irish Republic Army have been investigated in connection to the 1990 heist. And we'll get into those possible leads next week, as there are just too many to investigate in one day. If you know anything about the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum heist, I encourage you to contact the museum at 617-278-5114 or at reward@gardnermuseum.org. There will be financial compensation if you are able to help authorities secure these immensely valuable works of art. Thank you all so much for listening. I sincerely appreciate every one of you that takes time to listen to this show. It's been growing like crazy, and honestly, it's all because of you guys. I seriously cannot express my appreciation enough. You might notice that this episode is a smidge short, and that's because I was torn between making one very long episode or 2 slightly shorter episodes, and now, obviously, you're seeing my decision. However, if you are a paid subscriber, either on Patreon or Apple Podcasts, you will see a second episode that is the same title, except for it'll say subscribers only, and it will be slightly longer. That's all of the bonus content. If you would like to hear some information about the making of this episode, some behind-the-scenes details, find a way to subscribe, either on Patreon or here. To be fully transparent, my goal is to get 100 subscribers in about 6 months or so. That will let me know that there is enough interest to keep the bonus content coming. I try to be fairly guarded about my personal life, but I am the father of 2 very active and happy little boys, and I am a middle school teacher, so time is the most valuable resource that I have. So making bonus content is a huge challenge. But if I can see that there is interest there, I will certainly keep it up as much as I'm able to. Which I think within this new model should be every week. Again, but only if there's interest. So anyways, I'm going to get out of here. If you are a subscriber, enjoy the bonus content. And I'll talk to the rest of you next week.